Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on artificial intelligence. I am really excited about this webinar. I think we have some very useful information to share with you. We have three presenters, and we are not going to take time for questions in between presenters. We will have each of the presenters speak, and then we will have time for questions at the end. Each presenter speaks about 15 minutes. We will have time, and we will go over time for the conversation if people still have questions. And we will ask Steve and Senna if they can stay, if they will stay. I don't know if they have other obligations at the end of the hour. Um, our first presenter is Steve Roderick. He is a retired high school biology teacher, and he is a consultant and works for Concord Consortium, which is a nonprofit organization that is focused on the advancement of STEM in education. Then I will present the video for the second presentation because that person lives in South Korea and it's the middle of the night for him. So he prepared a presentation for us. He is Dr. Benjamin Chung, and he has done significant work with K-12 with systems thinking and system dynamics modeling in South Korea. He has a wonderful background in a lot of the work that he has helped bring forward for systems thinking and system dynamics in K-12 there. And Senna Yildiz Digirminsi, sorry, it
That's
takes me
good.
a while. She was a middle school science teacher, and she used system dynamics modeling in her science classes. She is now moved from Turkey and is a research assistant and a doctoral candidate at the Technical University of Munich in Germany. So now I won't be talking anymore. Steve, you can take it away.
Okay, let's see. Can we see the screen? That's the big question.
Yes.
Yes.
You can. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to start out with a couple of disclaimers. First of all, I'm going to be presenting a little bit about how ChatGPT works and how LLMs, which are large language models, work. But I am not an expert at all. When we first discussed this webinar, I volunteered to present something about this because I was interested in it. And I've been learning along the way. It's a challenge that I have happily faced. But I've also learned that GPTs are extremely complex and there's lots of rabbit holes to go down. So I'll do my best to answer questions at the end based on what I've learned, but I'm not an expert. And secondly, this is going to be a very superficial and quick look at something that's quite complicated. So I'll do the best I can. Okay. So the title of this webinar is ChatGPT, how knowing a little about its inner workings can help a teacher with planning and assessment in the classroom. Okay, let's see. So all of the AI models that have recently become popular have the same basic architecture and could be called GPTs. They have a goal, which is what the G stands for, and the goal is to generate new text. They require hours of pre-training in order to reliably meet that goal. And they have an underlying model that transforms input into the output that the GPT generates. So these three components basically are why it's called a GPT, and all of the different AI softwares that you can get hold of on the internet for free all work with the same basic architecture. So ChatGPT, as well as other AI programs, are essentially models that will take a known input and create a predicted output. And this is something that we all do. If we, science teachers do it all the time, scientists do it all the time. But as an analogy, I thought it might help to take a look at something that's similar but a little more simple than what's going on with ChatGPT. So imagine that you're concerned about global warming and you want to get a predictive sense of what the temperature might be in the year 2030, assuming that the world's production continues as it has been historically. The first thing you might do is you might gather some historical temperature measurements, have the computer organize it, and essentially train the computer, train the model based on these known data. So here you've got a picture of how that might look. Okay, and then once you have the data presented in some way, you might look for visual patterns or even ask the computer to mathematically determine a pattern of best fit to the data points. And in this case, the temperature data appear to be changing linearly over time. But the question becomes, well, what line would best generalize what's going on with these data? Would it be this line? Would it be here, or maybe there, or here? And we could look for these visual patterns. Let's see. Oops, sorry. I guess, oh, there we go. Okay. So luckily, there's a mathematical function that represents a straight line, right? So the pattern that we're looking at looks like it would be a straight line. And this function y equals mx plus b, probably familiar to many of you, but there's an input, which is the x, and there's an output, which is the y. And what we do is we kind of work on the input, the x variable, right, by multiplying it times a slope and adding to that the intercept on the y-axis as we have plotted these things. And you can think of this, the slope, the line itself will be adjusted based on what the slope is and what the y-intercept is, right? And so it's kind of like having little dials on these parameters that you can use to adjust to get the line of best fit, so that it might look like that, or it might look like this, but in the end we can get one that actually fits quite well, like this. So this idea of having parameters that you can adjust within the function to create an output that is reasonable is really the key to how the ChatGPT works. So as you can see, we've got this simple example. We put in the data to pre-train the model. We use the function to generate an output that is a prediction, which is, it looks like in 2030, it would be something like a 1.1, 1.01, something like that degree change in the temperature. So this is essentially what ChatGPT is doing, right? The input is a string of text, which is your prompt. The output is a prediction for the next appropriate word to what you put in. And the big difference is that the model being used goes well beyond a function for a straight line and uses instead a thing called a neural network. So what is a neural network? Well, a neural network is a layered matrix of causal relationships, right? The values in one layer are adjusted as they enter the next layer. And in much the same way that an input of x is adjusted by the slope and intercept in a linear equation, the original input, the text input that you put into the neural network is adjusted along the way until you get to the final output. Now, this particular picture that I've used here is a very simple neural network. It's only got two layers. Well, I mean, two working layers. There's an input layer and an output layer, and then there are two layers in the middle. ChatGPT 3 had many, many more layers. And in fact, this shows that it has 8 nodes within those inner layers there. And ChatGPT 3 has 175 billion nodes as opposed to 8. as in this picture. Um, so they're very, very complicated things. They're a bit of a mystery. They're modeled after the connected network of neurons in the brain. And it's interesting, if you read about all of this stuff, we know that these neural networks work. They actually create output that's reasonable. But the way that they're doing it, nobody really understands. It seems to be something that's analogous to what's going on in the brain, and it works, but we don't really understand why. So it's this is one of the rabbit holes that you can quickly go down if you start looking into this stuff. So the question is, how do these neural networks work? Well, they work very much like the example of the slope and intercept that I was showing you along the way, right? We have these little dials that represent the parameters in the equation. If I think about those dials as being inside of the neural network, try to imagine that you had 175 billion of these dials, and you put in some input, and it goes through all these different layers, and at each layer, the input is being adjusted in a minor way until it gets to the final output. So here's a quick example of how the LLM works, right? I can put in a textual prompt, something like, I just made this up, but behold a wild creature in its native blank. We don't know what it would be. So the input gets run into the model, which I'll show you in a minute, and a probability distribution of the next words is generated. So in this example, habitat at 62% is the highest probability. So what happens within the model is that the word habitat is then put onto the original prompt to now become, behold a wild creature in its native habitat. And then that prompt is put back at the beginning of the neural network and then run through again until we get another word. And then that gets shifted back. And it keeps doing this over and over and over again until finally you get some text that is contextually accurate and sounds like something that may have been written. So, behold a wild creature in its native habitat, foraging for food and enjoying a beautiful day. The morning sun magnifies the verdant green of the forest, and the flowers bloom all around. And this image, in fact, was generated by ChatGPT to create that. So that's essentially what's going on there is this iterative process of continually adding words and putting those words back at the beginning and running them through until you get something that makes sense. So it's interesting. This approach was developed quite early. ChatGPT 1 and ChatGPT 2 did this, and it all seemed pretty miraculous at the time. But it was found that for longer chunks of text, that the language ended up being kind of stiff and didn't sound very human-like. So in ChatGPT 3, that all changed. And why it changed, there's lots of reasons that it changed, but I think the biggest reason, at least in my understanding, is that ChatGPT 3 really developed ways to look at context within words. And it's interesting how this all works. So I thought if I ran through a quick description of how the model actually works, it might help you better understand this. But when ChatGPT 3 and 4 have been trained, they start out with essentially taking every word that's in the English language and tagging it with attributes, basically based on where that word fits into the training data. And by fit, what I mean is every word has kind of an environment, right? That like the word crocodile would very typically be found in the same kinds of sentences as alligator, right? But it wouldn't be found like with the word mother or father or something like that. The words kind of occupy a space within this multi-dimensional universe that we call language. So the first thing that happens is that every single word is given a list of numbers that are essentially an address within this language universe, essentially, that we have. And then when a prompt is made, right, if you write in a prompt, what happens is that the words, along with all those numbers that are associated with each of the words, get put into the neural net. And the very first thing that happens is that all of the words in the prompt are then, they kind of talk to each other. And the numbers that are associated with each word get adjusted a little bit to better match the context of what's going on. So for example, if you gave a prompt where you use the word model, for example, and the word model could be a fashion model, or it could be a model like the computational models that we're talking about here. Essentially what goes on inside the neural network is that the words kind of talk to each other and adjust their numbers based on what the other words in the prompt are. So this is the first kind of sense of context, right? That the neural net is actually developing context. And that's what this red box is. They're all the pieces are kind of talking to each other. And then once that context is developed, then the whole thing gets shifted through the rest of the neural net from layer to layer to layer, at each point being adjusted by these little dials, these parameters along the way, until it gets to the end, almost to where it's going to spit out the next word. But instead of spitting out that word, it gets reverted back to the original context box, which is called an attention block. And the context is refined even more, and it gets shoved through the entire network and then cycles back and does that until finally you get to a point where the essential meaning of the original prompt that you put in there is kind of distilled down to its essence. And it's from that essence that the output is generated, this probability series that we have of what would be the next possible word. So this idea of context is really, really important. And I think it plays into this question. So how does knowing this help a teacher plan and grade? It's really all about context. I think context is the key because it's the way Chat GPT works. It works through context as well. And the pre-training that goes on with the model involves looking at how the words are used in typical human writing, and assigning to the words that set of numbers that indicates the word's kind of typical literary environment. The attention block does more with context. So everything that's going on under the hood is really around context. And so what that means is that when you give a prompt, you are essentially pointing the computer in a direction, right? You want to say, well, the context I'm worried about or thinking about is this. Can you continue the journey along that trajectory, if you will, of context? So I have a couple of examples here. I asked ChatGPT to create a multiple choice question about stocks and flows. So I gave it no context at all except what's in that prompt. And what I got out was, well, it's reasonable. I think this multiple choice question, a stock is measured over time while a flow is measured at a particular point in time. It's getting at some of the essence of what stocks and flows are or are not in this particular case. But if I add a little more context to the prompt by stating some of my intention ahead of asking the question, I get a much better answer. So in this case, I said, I would like you to take on the role of a middle school teacher. So here's some context about the level that I want the question to be at. The teacher is using systems thinking in the classroom, and the students are learning the difference between a stock and a flow in a system dynamics diagram. And I get a much more rarefied kind of answer here that really gets more at what it is that middle school teacher might be wanting their students to know. So you can see there's much more detail in here. Um, it gets at accumulations and things entering and leaving stocks. Um, and it's important to know that ChatGTP also in a session that you're running with it, it will remember everything that you put in. So you can continually provide more and more context and get better and better output from the model. So in this case, what I did was I said, okay, well, take everything that you've given me so far, but now I want you to think about the language that you're using. I want it to be more for a fourth grade student. And what I got for a response here is a stock is something that moves, a flow is something that stays in one place. So now we're still getting at the essence of what the question's about, but we're using different language. So my point, I think, the takeaways here are that neural networks like ChatGPT are textual. They use textual context to distill prompts. And so context becomes very important. And it's really the key to getting good output. So if you can provide as much context as possible and background for any question that you ask, you're going to get a better response. So as a penultimate slide here, this is a list of suggestions that I pulled off of the internet about prompting. How do you create context in your prompts? So, you want to be clear and specific. You want to start with instructions. You want to tell the computer that it's playing a certain role. Maybe use previous answers that you've gotten as examples for something that you're looking for. So again, it's really generically about providing context. So that's the end. And if you're interested in ChatGPT, you can link to chatgpt.com. You can set up an account, get started. And much of the stuff that I got out of here, I got from an article by Stephen Wolfram. And that's available here. It's called What is ChatGPT Doing and Why Does It Work? I think he also has a book that he published, a very short book about this as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was a wonderful presentation. The next presentation is a video, and I am more inclined to have people present who are actually live here. The next presentation talks about the problems with Chat GPT and like hallucinations and things like that. If you don't mind, I would really like to take it out of order and place it third and have Senna present next. If that doesn't make you nervous, Senna, moving you up.
Surprise.
Okay. I would like her to present next, and then we will play Benjamin's video last on some of the problems with Chat GPT and how you can turn them around to be actually positive kinds of things using Chat GPT. So, Senna, would you please do your presentation now?
Yeah. Okay. So I shared my screen. So hi everyone. I am here not as starting as Steve has started. I'm here not as an AI expert or something, but I am a teacher and at the same time a person in the education industry who is curious about AI and what can it bring to support teachers for their lesson planning. So I will share my very specific experience with ChatGPT, again, a generative AI tool. And so if you think of it as like an experiment, the number of participants is one. So I will be sharing my very own experience with ChatGPT and how I used it to create a lesson plan using system dynamics. So I will tell you what I have done very in the beginning. So when we are planning lessons using system dynamics, as teachers, first we need to understand what the model says. So sometimes we need to create a model by ourselves, but sometimes we are already using a ready-made model or a simulation, and we are kind of trying to adapt it to our lessons. So the first thing that we can use the ChatGPT is to understand the model and what does it say, what kind of feedback loops are in there. And the second part is a little bit more pedagogical part. So how can I use this model to teach the concept that I want to teach at different levels? So kind of adapting it. And the last part is fine-tuning. So I have an idea how to teach it in the classroom, but I need to change some parts of it. And how can I use again ChatGPT to do that? So I will be sharing some very examples on understanding what does the model tell and feedback loops in the stock flow diagram. So in how to teach this lesson in different levels, and some really little fine-tuning parts like integrating different learning activities, or sometimes that it gives the answer without using the system dynamics method, and then I need to reframe it in that way. So for this one, I mostly used 2 custom GPTs. So sometimes I'm using the one System Dynamics GPT, and but the examples that you will see in this presentation will be the second one, which is Systems Thinking for K-12 Education. And you can see my name there because I created this custom GPT to help teachers to create their own lesson plans. So what does a custom GPT does is a little bit limited. So you kind of give the framework to that GPT beforehand, so it knows the role already in the beginning. When you start chatting with ChatGPT already, that you need to, as Steve said, that you need to give the context. So you're an expert in this area and that area, and you will be helping teachers to do that, and so on. But with the custom GPTs, this is kind of already defined, and therefore that you can directly go into using them. And it is for creating a custom GPT, you need to have a premium plan, but to use them, you do not need to use, you do not need to have a premium plan. You can just go and try the custom ones. So I will start with an example of population, and we will continue with that population example. So how I started is always with a model and asking the GPT, can you explain me what is happening in this model? And what it is doing is first putting it into small parts. So dear bird, dear dad, carrying capacity and feedback loop. And then it explains this is an inflow, this is an outflow, and it explains some of the parts inside the model. And at the same time, not only defining the parts, but also starts explaining the concepts in it and the dynamics in it. And since this is a kind of a model helping teachers how to to create lessons around the model, then it continues talking to you okay, this model can be used to teach students about population dynamics and concepts like carrying capacity and equilibrium. And then it always ends with a question. So it kind of directs teachers in a way that how they would like to continue with their lesson planning. And the second part that I continued was can you explain me the feedback loops here? And then it continues with explaining the feedback loops. So reinforcing loop, and then it shows the path. And then in the end that it explains how this is affecting, how this loop is affecting the behavior. And then the balancing loop, and then this similar to the previous one, that there is the path, and then how these loops are working together. And none of these are actually predetermined. So what does the custom GPT is doing is it knows that it is helping for system dynamics lesson planning, and it is talking to the teachers and it has the booklet from our association in Turkey. So it has the knowledge for like systems thinking in education, and then it kind of directs the teacher in a way that can help using this model to create the plan. But so far we are at this stage to understand the model. While I'm understanding the model, at the same time, I'm creating the context for the GPT for later dialogue. Okay, so then very straightforward question, how can I teach this model and concepts at different levels? Then it gives us answers for different levels. So elementary level, middle school level, and also the high school level. And if you have a closer look, you do not need to read it all through, but at the middle school level, it already starts using the system dynamics terms. So it is more focusing on the dynamics, but when I look at the elementary level, I found it a little bit less because it is, of course, again, focusing on the dynamics, but with a basic feedback loop and with the activity example. But other than that, it is not much focusing on it. So I thought, okay, if I'm teaching it at the elementary level, I need to fine tune it a little bit. And because this is not helping me to still create the lesson plan. And when I ask, I would like to use system dynamics to teach population concept at elementary level. So can you modify your suggestion? And then it starts with simplified concepts. And this is kind of, it is always using a similar answer. So always starting with the concepts. And then since I asked it, can you modify your questions with the system dynamics? Then it kind of integrates how to explain it with the system dynamics like words. Okay. And still, there is still a pedagogical part integrated, which I liked it. That's why I highlighted it here. So it is kind of advising me not to use carrying capacity because this is the elementary level, but using terms like enough food or space and so on. And then, although I didn't ask, it suggested me some learning activities. So this is because I didn't limit the answers. I didn't ask a very specific thing, but can you modify this for elementary level? Then it started giving me learning activities like, for example, story-based teaching, interactive diagrams, or a physical activity. This is like students being deers, and then some students are controlling the bird, and some students are controlling the dead. And then each round that they are counting how many new deers are born or dead. And then it continued that we can use simple simulations to have this game on a computer screen and then students simulating it by themselves to see how the behavior goes. And then also graphing it with stickers and connecting it to the real life with some more questions. And it didn't stop. It continued with the modification and differentiation. Then how to adapt it for younger students and older students and so on. Then another thing that we were trying with our lesson plans was to connect it with different topics, kind of building a bridge. And one of the topics was biodiversity. When we were talking about the population, we also wanted to talk about biodiversity. And I wanted to test if it would give some meaningful suggestions when I want to combine two concepts at one lesson. And so its direction was more like including different species. So still focusing on the population, but having more than one species in one model. So for example, adding a plant population or adding predators, and then focusing on the loops between those animals and plants. What was a little bit surprising for me that it differentiated negative feedback from balancing feedback. And I actually asked it, what is the difference and so on, that it it continued to differentiate these two feedback from each other. And then it continued with explaining how to teach this with the learning activities. So it included the same learning activities, but this time it included the different species inside, and then giving some examples or discussion questions. And similar, like graphing biodiversity linking to real life. So everything is staying the same, but it kind of giving examples with focusing on more biodiversity part. And when it suggested discussion points, they are actually really good to discuss in the classroom. I also wanted to include like how can I discuss these questions using the stock flow diagram that we had in the beginning. And that's what I asked. So I would like to teach this concept with system dynamics. Can you modify your discussion points? And then what it is doing is really basically, again, explaining the concept, a system dynamics concept in the beginning related to the question that it asked before, and then kind of giving a key point for the simple words for students so that it is done for every little question in here. So when we have a look at it, I actually didn't use so many prompts, but what helped me was starting with the model. So, and creating context very in the beginning was very actually helpful. But at the same time, when we discuss, like if we discuss these prompts, although they are like really, how to say, not so much in quantity, that it actually took a bit of a while for me to find what is working for ChatGPT to give me the answers so that it is helpful for my own lesson planning. And it takes some more trials and yeah, so it is not happening very in the beginning, but it just takes some time to understand how to ask the questions and how to use the answers to elaborate on my questions and so on. And as we said, like we always discuss this, the ChatGPT capabilities are a little like they are limited. And even when we are working with a colleague, when we are planning the lesson plan, we always question the other side's ideas, and we monitor and control the process by ourselves. And with AI, we need to do it more often. We need to check for the facts and using it more like a brainstorming tool and guiding us for creating the content, but not just giving it to a job to do that. And at the same time, at the moment, so it can read the model, but it cannot create the model as a picture. But probably in the next SIG meeting, Diana will also show us some examples how to use like ChatGPT to create the models or work on the models to modify it for the lessons. So I am also looking forward to like learning more about this part. And thank you so much. So I wanted to bring the perspective that how can we use this tool to support teachers to use system dynamics in their classroom. And I try to share my experience, but if you also try something and if you would like to share, I'm happy to discuss it further also later. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sena. Both of these presentations have been wonderful. Really, really exciting for this new work and for how it can impact education. Of course, both have alluded to some of the problems about ChatGPT, and I'm sure that we have heard a lot about these problems. Our next speaker from South Korea, his English is pretty good, He tried to speak very slowly and um, and enunciate his words well, but he also created subtitles. I have turned off the subtitles, but I think you can turn them on for yourself. I am going to share the screen and have his presentation now for you. I know you all want to ask questions, and I'm trying to get there as quickly as possible. Okay. This is Benjamin Chung from South Korea.
Turning AI's limitations into opportunities, leveraging AI for critical thinking in system thinking education. Hi, I'm Benjamin from South Korea. If you are interested in me, this QR code will help you. This is my conclusion. Practicing system thinking with the help of AI can develop philosophical thinking, especially critical thinking. I will connect system thinking, AI, and philosophical thinking by focusing on operational thinking, hallucination issue, black box nature, reproducibility problem, critical thinking, epoche. In system thinking, the operational thinking perspective focuses on how things work. This is naturally leading to a strong interest in causality. This focus necessitates distinguishing between correlation and causation. System dynamics doesn't reject correlation, but pursuing causality is a system thinker's mission and destiny. It's like a Sisyphus rolling his rock, endless and necessary. That's why we emphasize approximation. Whenever we talk about downsides of AI, we mention hallucination issue, black box nature, reproducibility problem. By definition, hallucination is something that you see, hear, feel, or smell that does not exist. A year ago, hallucinations were used to mock AI because there are so many wrong answers. However, hallucination issues are diminishing at a very rapid pace, but it still exists, they admit it. Black box nature. The black box nature of AI is non-negotiable from system thinking perspective that value operational transparency. How about the reproducibility problem? AI uses large language models, LLMs, which generate responses based on statistical patterns. LLMs produce outputs stochastically based on probability distribution rather than deterministic rules. As a result, LLMs may provide different answers to the same question each time. You can try it yourself. Here is a QR code for more information. This is the question. As you can see, the same question does not produce the same result. This inherently conflicts with reproducibility, a cornerstone of scientific methodology. These characteristics, hallucinations, black box nature, and lack of reproducibility raise crucial questions. Can we consider AI outputs as scientific? How can we trust and utilize AI-generated information? These challenges lead us to the essential concepts in critical thinking, doubt, or epoche. Let's move on to philosophical thinking. The concept of doubt, which we often employ in critical thinking has deep roots in philosophical tradition. In ancient Greek philosophy, this systematic application of doubts was encapsulated in the term epoche, meaning the suspension of judgment. Interestingly, we can see a similar principle in Immanuel Kant's work, though he didn't explicitly use the term epoche. In his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant introduced the idea of critique, which involves systematically examining the capability and limitations of human reason. This approach, while not identical to epoche, shares its spirit of suspending immediate judgment and critically examining our thought processes. This concept has experienced a revival in modern philosophy. Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology and influenced by Kantian philosophy, specifically emphasized the epoche. Husserl advocated for suspending judgment to grasp the essence of phenomena, introducing the method of bracketing or parenthesizing as a practical application of epoche. Parenthesizing can set aside our assumptions more directly. Thus, we system thinker can say parenthesizing mental model is our disbelief. In essence, epoche encourages us to be suspicious, to question and suspend immediate judgment. This is a critical thinking approach that has evolved from ancient Greek thought through Kant to modern phenomenology. In summary, the drawbacks of AI, hallucinations, black box nature, and reproducibility issues are sensitive topics that create tension from the operational thinking perspective of system thinking. This tension is further intensified by the core concepts of critical thinking, epoche. Importantly, this very tension serves as a powerful driving force for learning. By the way, how about the hallucination issue made by human senses? Do you see a rectangle in the center of the image and that length and that rectangle has a gradation? There is a light on the left and darker toward the right. Do you still see a gradation? 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 No, this shape is the original. Can you trust your senses? Which color do you see? Black, blue, or white, brown? All three of these clothes are identical. Same color, same size. Can you trust your senses? These two flowers are identical. On the left is what it looks like to human eyes. On the right is what it looks like through the eyes of an insect. Humans see colors in RGB, but insects see colors in more diverse way. Plants evolved to attract insects. From the perspective of an insect, that red spot says, "Come here, don't go anywhere else. There is something good for you in the red spot." How do you think? Can you trust your senses? Do you still think the flower is yellow. If you say it's yellow, I think your thought is human hubris. System is value neutral, so by nature, system is open to different interpretations depending on the point of view. Now, we can understand a little bit why Nietzsche says there are no facts, only interpretations. Nietzsche's words should be interpreted carefully. He was emphasizing on the relativity of causality, not the absence of causality. So far, I've introduced the philosophical concepts of doubt or epoche, thanks to AI's shortcomings. However, you can leverage the power of AI for philosophical thinking. The best thing about AI that I've found is reasoning capability. Now, let's move on to system thinking. You can see this reasoning process in detail with a QR code. Don't miss the QR code. The more bullying behavior, the more victims' anxiety levels. The more bullying behavior, the lower academic performance of victims. I think we can all agree with these causalities, right? But how about this causality? Can you agree with this easily? At this point, let's call the AI. Please provide 3 conditions under which bullying behavior could lead to a decrease in victims' anxiety levels. Then AI will answer very, very nicely. We just pick and choose with doubt. The implication of this activity is that the causal relationship is dependent on condition. The philosophical community emphasizes the conditional causation in a variety of ways. But from a system thinking perspective, we can come up with one word: diversity. The ultimate purpose of our favorite iceberg model is to highlight the mental model. Mental models can be understood as assumptions. Assumptions, by definition, is something that you accept as true without question or proof. People are concerned that assumptions are intensified by confirmation bias, and confirmation bias is also intensified by assumptions. On the other hand, confirmation bias is reinforced by the algorithm of AI, and AI is further enhanced by the confirmation bias because confirmation bias makes money. But what if you could use AI to attack assumptions? In this context, nowadays, I'm actively utilizing artificial intelligence in my system thinking class. I've included my lesson plan at the end of my supplementary materials. I want to share one more idea with you. I think the ultimate goal of practicing doubting and diversity in thinking is to get better decision making. And decision making involves compromise. In this process, there is a inevitable collective value selecting process. We must negotiate why certain values are better than others. This ability to prioritize values stems from the humanities, because the humanities are the stories of humans' value, humans' decision making. That is why we need to have an interest in the humanities. Yes, the ability to collectively select values can be enhanced by the humanities. The students who are trained with collective value selecting capability will be the global and democratic citizens. Diversity in ecosystems, society, culture, and politics will thrive with more of these citizens. And this diversity will eventually bring about a new belle epoch of the humanities. We can make these structures by combining system thinking education with AI. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we can open. Oops, wait a minute. Where did that come from? Uh-oh, I don't know where that's coming from.
Maybe YouTube started the next video.
I didn't. I hope not. Emre, would you start the discussion?
Okay. So I'm not good at starting discussions, but so
Are there
maybe
any
Okay.
questions?
we can.
I got it turned off. Sorry about that. I did not anticipate that problem. We have some questions in the chat, but first I would like to open it up to the people who are here. For our two presenters who are here. And if you want to ask the third presenter, you can ask the question, but it will have to be sent to him. So maybe if you put it in the chat, that might be better. And he can respond to you later. Please ask our presenters who are here questions that you might have. And if you will raise your hand, I will try to ask you to speak in order. Is there anyone who has a question for either Steve or Senna? Or a general question? Anyone? Okay, if you don't have a question, there are some questions in the chat. Paul says, wait, here. Oh, it seems like, doesn't the deer model contain 3 loops and not 2 loops? That's from Paul Newton. That's for you.
I put in and I did enter an answer in there. He's right. I mean, that model does have 3 loops. And to me, that speaks to the need to have people involved in all of this. Right. That there are hallucinations, and based on what I've learned about these things, I mean, the model only responds using context that it's been given through its training, its pre-training. And it may be that was an empty spot that never quite made it, understanding that or seeing a picture like that and seeing 3 loops as opposed to 2.
I think our students are going to want to try to use AI as kind of an easy way out. We need definitely to have the critical doubt component as part of the instruction from the beginning. So I think as I experiment more, I'm finding out I need to check things that it gives me more and more. The next question from Paul, which Steve, you also responded to, is, are the connections in a neural network really causal relationships? And so, Steve, would you like to respond to that in person?
Well, sure. I'll try my best. I guess technically they're not true causal relationships, but much like a system dynamics model where you can have multiple components impacting one other component, in some multiplicative way or some additive way. I mean, that's essentially what's going on, is my understanding, is that if you have a node at one level of the neural net, it's connected to another node at the next level of the neural net, and potentially other nodes are connected in there as well. And the adjustment that's made at that second level is a combination of the weights of what was at the previous level. So, I mean, there is a causal link there, but it's not like the one node is causing the other one to do something. It's just one component in an effect that happens. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, this is Paul. It does make sense, but this kind of gets at what we mean, or begins to, for me, to help me question what is a causal relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, Paul. I mean, and there's a lot of research on that.
Yeah.
If you
Okay.
look in the literature, what is a causal relationship?
I understand your answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Paul was very busy in the chat. If there's nothing else from the audience here, I will go on to Paul's next question. Given a pattern over time and sufficient context, can an AI tool create a plausible dynamic hypothesis? That is, a plausible system structure that could be responsible for creating the pattern over time? Well, my answer to that is I think so. That's kind of what I've been playing with. And we did not have enough time to have additional ideas presented at this webinar. So we are using our SIG meeting next month for a couple more shorter presentations with longer time to discuss. But I have given Claude, actually, a description of a problem, had it create the Stella code for me, and open the Stella code in Stella Online. And so I will talk about that particular process next month. And I want to see how specific the description, the prompt has to be. I still need to do some experimenting with that. But yes, I think we can actually have a description produce a stock flow model. I know we can, because I've done it at least a couple of times.
Well, it's interesting, Diane. The third presentation, the video, he was talking about how you could get different answers
Right.
to the same question. So it might be kind of interesting if a AI model can indeed create dynamic hypotheses. I'm thinking about a teacher in their class. If you could generate multiples and then have the students, okay, take this, create a model, and see if you can create a set of parameters in that model that would actually allow the model to reproduce the input dynamics. I mean, kind of try to prove the AI wrong, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that I want to test from both Steve's and Senna's and Benjamin's presentation is, if I give the same prompt multiple times and get code multiple times, will I get the same structure multiple times?
And I'm also curious, I don't know that we need to go all the way to code, I'm thinking just a textual description of the dynamic hypothesis, just to make that maybe describes the 2 or 3 feedback loops in the dynamic hypothesis that could create the system. So if it could just do that without even producing the code, and then, okay, here's an idea that this AI gave me. Can I generate a model and parameterize it plausibly for the real world situation such that it would produce the dynamics? And so, yeah, it'd be great if it could give us code, but then I'm worried that we're maybe taking some of the learning out of it for us.
That's
Yeah.
always an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Emre?
And for the reproducibility problem, in not the free ones, but in the paid versions of LLMs, there is a setting called temperature. This setting normally set between 1 and 0 and normally set to 0.5 means how variable the reply to the prompt we want it to be. And if we take it to 0, it definitely gives the same answer to the same question all the time. When you put it to 1, it never gives the same thing, and it is more creative. It always gives another thing. So maybe this problem might not be that much a big problem.
Another thing that came up, I don't know if it was in the chat or not, probably it was, and it was probably Paul, said he'd really like to know what materials you used to train your bots. I think we can talk about that next month when we will have more discussion time. I think that's a really important question. And so any other questions that you would like to address, certainly we will try to do that. There's a lot for us to learn as we play with this, but we've got to learn it because AI is going to significantly impact education immediately. And kids are excited about it, and we need to provide them some guidance so they know how to use it responsibly. It's an amazing tool, and it's our job to help them learn to use it in ways that help them learn. Martha?
Thanks, Diane. Just a quick sharing of an experience that I think might be helpful or valuable to many of us, and that is I was using my little home version, not home version, but my current service of AI to write a summary of actually Jay Forrester sayings and thoughts, and it fed out certain, nice information. But I was concerned that I wanted to find the sources of that information that was in the chat, the AI chat, and I happened to be on the line with Gene Bellinger, who is Mr. IT in life, and he showed me he put in a similar prompt, but through his program, which is Gemini Advance or something, or premium for $10 a month, and you can get a free trial for it, which I'm going to try. What impressed me, and really brought me great solace, was to see that at the bottom of the bottom bar below the text that the Gemini program had furnished, reiterating and summarizing Jay's thoughts on certain things, they had the sources of those thoughts. They could take it back to they could provide attributions, if you will, to the information that they were providing to me as the consumer of that service. So I plan to I plan to work with that a lot more, because I think that is at least one area when it comes to interpreting straight factual information. Did Jay say this or did he not? And what ChatGPT is interpreting from that, or what AI is interpreting from that, it seems to me helpful, at least a helpful step in validating and making it a little bit more reliable if they can show their traces back to what they're saying.
Yeah,
I don't
Martha,
know.
can I just ask a quick question about
yeah, sure.
did you did Gene specifically ask Gemini to do that? I mean, because in Chat GPT, if you ask it, it will do that. It doesn't automatically do it, I think.
Oh, was
I
that
just
right?
wondered if that was
Okay.
part of the prompt.
Okay. No, see, I don't know. I don't use the service a lot, so I don't know all the bells and whistles of it, but I will. I was going to do that with my service, which is called Hello AI, and in another prompt, I was going to say, "Can you confirm the sources of your interpretations of what Jay said?" So I haven't done that yet, but I do. I was just very impressed that they're furnishing this information up in the storefront to the consumers, and it's almost like its own prompt for the person using AI to, oh, here we can show you these sources instead of you having to prompt in. But I understand what you're saying, and I'll investigate the ask function in my own service. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. I'll have to tell you that I have tried to use AI to give me sources, research sources for particular things I want to use, like in papers. And
Yes.
I have found very low reliability of the sources that it has shown me for the particular concept or idea. So I even ask it for quotes from reference papers, and I have not once found the quote they said was in a reference paper from the list of items, list of papers that it has given me. So you have to check all those references because they are, and I was using Chat GPT 4.0 and Claude, and different generative AIs have different strengths, but there are a lot of free versions out there that are worth checking out and starting to practice on your own. Go ahead, Lise.
I think that is one of the biggest sources of hallucinations in AI. It's the actual referencing. You aren't the only one that's had that trouble with references. Some pretty savvy IT folks have, in the medical world, have done some extensive research on how many of the references are accurate. They find that AI, and now it can be getting better, and my information may well be out of date. But I mean, hallucinations on at least 50% of all the references, that those were not papers that were actually written and not available. So.
Thank you, Lise. I think we definitely have to watch for that seriously. Before, Martha, I call on you, Paul had asked a question and Steve has answered it in the prompt. I think it's really important to read this. He says, I put this into Chat GPT as a prompt. I have some data showing that the deer population on our small island in Narragansett Bay has been growing faster and faster every year since 1960. I am worried that there are no predators on the island. Can you give me the idea of what might be going on? One piece of the response I got was a causal loop diagram. So right. Steve has done some experimenting with that. And Paul says, did the causal loop diagram make sense to you as a possible explanation? And Steve says, not really. It all, in all the components of a potential loop, it had all the components of a potential loop, but the connections did not form a loop. Anyway, so I think
Yeah.
there is some, you want to say something, Steve, more about that?
Only that I did that while we've been talking, and with more and more prompting, again, to give it more context, you can get it to give you what you're after.
Right.
But it needs more context. Like if I went in and put in a prompt now that said that, this was not, you gave me this, but it's not a loop. Can you please adjust? I might get something that looked much more reasonable.
There is a real art to creating a prompt that will provide you what you're looking for. And I think we all end up having to learn that. Luckily, it can be an iterative learning process, which is quite helpful. Martha, you wanted to say something. Go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. What actually really prompted me to use the AI was I was looking for a statement that Jay had made during the seminar, the Jay Forrester seminar series, and my AI service told me that they do not have access. I don't know if they use that word. They did not have that statement that I clearly remember him saying in their data bank, and so it makes me wonder whether the content that they use for their straight factual information is limited to text, written text, and that they don't have access in their neural network data sources to a video factual video sourced factual information, because the Jay Forrester seminar series, while it hasn't it has been available in certain ways, but not actually, when I think of it, through the System Dynamics Society, but it's out now as the online course, and it is technically available, but maybe AI is not using visual factual information. Do you see what I'm saying? He said it, but we went ahead and we made transcripts, which has put this into text version. And I'm wondering if their data sources are strictly from written sources,
Well,
and they don't have the capacity for the visual verbal
I think there are gradations of you pay more, you get more capabilities, and there are some kind of attachments that you can make to certain AIs available. Has anyone else had any experience trying to query using AI, query about a video? I don't have an experience with that.
I did read in that article that I put the link there by Stephen Wolfram, that a lot of the pre-training uses the tags from video, so that, or from images. So you know how they'll put a tag on it to explain in text what the image is, or that they will have, as you say, a transcript. And that's what, for the large language models, that's what goes into the training. So I think, there are other not LLMs, but there are other neural nets that take imagery and will then create text from it. The transforming
Right.
is from visual to text.
It prompts me actually this afternoon. I'm gonna go to Hello AI and simply ask them, do you have information from the Jay Forrester seminar series? It has been just recently, as part of this project for the System Dynamics Society, been transcripted, but that's the first time it's only in the past couple of years that project was finished and has been entered into the transcripted world. But I'll be interested to see what they say in response to that direct prompt. And maybe why not? If I can ask them, why not? See what kind of answer I get. Why or why not? I'll report my findings.
Great. Great. AI is improving pretty quickly. I'm surprised at how quickly it is getting better. But I'm only using the free versions. So I'm waiting to see because Claude is really good with code. So some of these different large language model offerings to people have certain strengths over others. And so it's really hard to choose one if you want to pay for one. What do you want to use it mostly for is a big deal. Are there any other questions? If, happy to, I haven't been looking at the chat.
Diane, I sorry to
Yes.
interrupt.
Yes, Senna.
I really need to leave now.
Yes, sure.
And thank you very much for the discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. And thank you for listening, everyone.
It was great. Thank you for all the work you did on your presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you.
very much, Senna.
See you.
Bye. Bye. She's an amazing person. I'm just always so impressed with what she has been able to accomplish and how much she is learning. Okay, so Paul, who seems to be our best questioner, is he still here? He is. There is a loop from reproduction to deer to reproduction, and the lack of predators means this loop is stronger than it would be with predators. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just feeding off what
right, what Steve said.
Steve wrote, that there is a loop in his so it actually seems to me that, I mean, basically that little causal diagram that they gave you, basically it sort of says the same thing that he said in his question, but at least it's trying to come up with something, right? So
yes.
it does make sense to me, but
yeah, it does. It makes sense. There was, I can't put this in the chat because there was a visual, it actually was CSS code, I guess, that was output for the question, and it had arrows and that kind of thing to look like a causal loop diagram, but it never looped back. It was essentially the same thing that it was written in the text here. So the loop is in there. You can find it, but it doesn't show up physically as a loop.
Yeah. And the other thing, Diane, I'm sorry Sina's gone now, but it sounded like she actually she customized ChatGPT she customized some AI to create that teacher lesson planning tool.
Bot, the bot.
Yeah, and I don't know if people would be interested. I certainly would. Okay, how the heck do you do that? Just to give us a rough outline of how do you do that? What does that look like when you customize something? How does that work?
So I have to tell you, Paul, that's not a small discussion. And Emre has done quite a bit of this. So he and Senna both ought to talk a little bit about this in our meeting next month, where we'll have some more. But you're absolutely right. I'm interested in that because we want to develop, and actually Benjamin Chung has also done it in South Korea. We really need kind of a list of the documents that they've fed to the bot to kind of train it so that the output it gives is more useful and more dedicated to what we're looking for. But let's hold that till next month.
Yeah, right. I knew it was a next time thing or some other time. But the other thing though is, for the audience that you want in this meeting, is that really something that most people would? I mean, I'm just curious. I would never do it because I don't think, but I'm just kind of curious about how that works. I mean, once you have a tool like that, I mean, the tool she has that she's already created, maybe more guidance on how to use that tool or something for teachers would be more appropriate than how do you build it.
Well, I hate to say, I mean, as a teacher, I want to because I care about make these things practical from the perspective that I want to use. And I might have a slightly different focus I would like in the chat bot that I have to use. So I like to know what people have done so I can specialize it for my own purposes. And as we decide eventually to pay for chat GPT services or whatever services that we want to have higher capabilities, we're going to want to specialize our own chatbots.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Oh, Emre, go ahead.
Well, if we have time, I can show how you can access Sena's customized GPT from free version of the GPT. It's quite easy actually. If you are interested, or maybe next.
Let's hold it off. We're already half an hour over, but I really think we want to have this discussion next month. We're already half an hour over, so I think we probably should quit. I hate to cut Emre off. I learned so much from him. He's a font of information. But I do think for the people who are here who are trying to stay with us till the bitter end, we probably should call it quits for today. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you all very much for coming. It's amazing and fun to talk about. Thank you. And hopefully come and see us next month. We should have more time for discussion.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Bye, everybody.
Really nice
Bye, everybody.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.